fifth continent, whose art we are going to learn to recognize, is North America, our continent. We start out reviewing the continents and what we've learned about art from the different places. Which continent might this be from? Good, South America. And from what material is it made? What do we call this kind of artwork? And where was that artwork made? Where do you think this was made? What do we call the people that make this kind of art? How did you recognize it? Do you recognize this art? Which continent? And from what material is this made? Do you know where this portrait with the landscape in the background is from? What made you think it was from Asia? Now let's get back to North America. The additional standards we'll cover in this lesson are create art based on everyday scenes, recognize and talk about the design of everyday objects from various times and places, and compare folk art from different times and places. The Common Core state standards we'll follow are ask and answer questions about what a speaker says, give, restate, and follow simple two-step directions. Our vocabulary is folk stories, folk art, and quilts. Outside of our cities, we have lots of farms in North America, and cattle ranches. We have deserts, and we have mountains, and prairies. Those are wide areas that are really flat and have lots of grass. We have beaches, and forests and streams, and glaciers. These are the countries of North America. The yellow is the United States, and Alaska is part of the United States, and the country north to us in blue is Canada, and to the south in brown is Mexico. These small countries make up Central America. They're Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. And then way up here is Greenland. It's really cold there, second only to Antarctica. And it's the biggest island in the world, but it has fewer people than any other place in the world because it is so cold. Miss places like the White House, the ancient pyramids of Mexico, the Statue of Liberty in New York, Mount Rushmore, where the faces of American presidents are carved into the mountain. We have the Grand Canyon, and Niagara Falls, which is in both Canada and the United States. And we have Native American people in all the countries. In Canada and the northwestern United States, they make art that looks like this. This is called a totem pole, and each part of the totem pole means something as far as the family. So these people have a totem pole outside of their house, and if someone who knows about them sees the totem pole outside, they'll know exactly who lives there. The Native Americans make works of art out of things that they use every day, like this blanket, or this basket woven of dry grass, or this clay pot, or this leather shirt, or these beaded moccasins. These Katsina dolls are made for Hopi girls by their uncles. They're not really to play with, but they're very special to the girls. This little ceramic church is only 2 feet tall. It's an example of Mexican folk art. And folk art is art that's made by regular people, not necessarily professional artists. And how to do it is passed down from one generation to the next. So your grandmother would teach your mother or your father, and they would teach you, and you would grow up and teach your children. And that's how people learn to make folk art. Here's a sun mask, which is also folk art from Mexico. Here's a long, narrow mask made in Canada. Where else have we seen masks that were long and narrow? Exactly, in Africa. Why are they long and narrow? What do you think this is made from? Yes, it's made from wood, from a tree trunk or a tree limb. Folk art paintings are often everyday scenes that happen in people's lives. This one was painted by a really famous artist, Grandma Moses, and she raised her family, and she didn't start painting until she was almost 80 years old. So she painted for 20 years, and she died at 101. Here's another folk art painting of everyday life. Can you see the ladies in front of the house? What does it look like they're doing? They're actually making quilts, and you can see over here that they've got quilts for sale. So they're over here making their quilts. Do you know what a quilt is? Yes, a quilt is like a blanket that you use on the bed. It's made from small pieces of fabric. Moms used to make clothes for their whole families, and of course they would have small pieces of cloth left over, so they would get together with their friends and they would have a quilting bee. You know, they didn't have television and movies back then. So they would make quilts. And everybody would put their scraps in from the different clothing, and they would make story quilts or quilts with symbols. They would make a bridal quilt for somebody who was getting married, and they enjoyed themselves tremendously while they were doing it. Here's a quilt pieced together to look like all the states of the United States. This is called a star quilt. Now we're going to make folk art. We're going to make our own quilt. Of course, ours would be made of paper, but we're going to do scenes from our everyday lives. Now, teachers, at this point, we brainstorm. What are things that we do? So they have lots of ideas that they can make. And I have them do the whole thing in crayon. When they're working with crayons, they seem to work a little larger than they do when they work in pencil. And I give them a 6x6 square of paper. And then I cut strips, long strips to put in between. And we make it on butcher paper. I make a sample for the students, so I have my quilt square too. And I show them how to start with stick figures, so that they can go ahead and get a layout of what's going on first. And then, okay, here we are. And we're both pointing at the avocado tree. And here's her son. Once we get that set up, then I'm going to draw the tree and branches off of it. Nothing too fancy, it's first grade. And then we can just color in some of these branches. Give it a little texture. Throw in some avocados. pretty obvious when you're drawing like a first grader. And then just put some leaves in. We can fill in the parts for the hair. And the hair, it's always important to do the hair before we do the face. That way we don't end up with the eyes quite so high. And let's give her black hair. Just to differentiate between the two of us. And we'll give her little boy brown hair. And then we can fill in the neck, a little bit in the face to give us some color. And go ahead and put the clothes on, so we're putting jeans on. Since we're at home and we're picking avocados. This is all really fast too, so it's definitely going to look like folk art. And then we've got his, let's give him purple pants. And he gets a red shirt. Give everybody, give him a pink mouth. Whoops, forgot to color his face. Give us eyes. Guess we'll give ourselves first grade mouths. Pink shirt. She can have an orange one. We'll both be pointing at the avocados. And then some shoes on him, and we'll give him the avocado picker, which, let's see, he can have the avocado picker, and it looks like this. And, well, might as well put a ladder in. Then all I need to do is fill in a little background. And of course, the sky, we want to make sure that we bring the sky all the way down to the ground. And we have a quilt square, a little sky between there. And there's our quilt square. Now, the students go ahead and make theirs. While they're making the quilt quilt squares is when I actually do the performance task, and I call them back one at a time with a large map of the continents, and I give them, maybe 2 by 2 inch pictures of the different kinds of art from the continents, and they just place them on the map. Place the squares about 3/4 of an inch apart, and then cut strips to go across the edges, both vertically and horizontally, about 1.25 inches. And then for the outer edges, I cut them 2 inches, so we get a little more of a border around the outside of the quilt. And that's it for Unit 4. Artists from all over the world make works of art. And I think we've answered our question, how does art look in different parts of the world?